Welcome to Good Catholic Great Stories, where we explore fascinating stories from and for the world of Catholicism.
So welcome. Today we have with us Keaton Douglas, who is the Executive Director of the I Thirst Initiative of the Missionary Servants of the Most Holy Trinity. And I am Whitney Hetzel, your host today for Good Catholic Great Stories. Welcome, Keaton. We're so excited to have you today.
Thanks, Whitney. I'm so excited to be here.
And Keaton comes to us from chilly New Jersey, where I think you said it's you woke up to the 20s and it's going to maybe get to mid-30s today there.
That's it. Winter is fast approaching for sure.
It is here too in North Carolina. So Keaton is a very interesting guest today. I'm very excited for our listeners to get to know Keaton. We're going to start with her, what she's presently doing right now, and in order to really delve into her story, we'll back up at some point, Keaton, and you can tell us kind of how you got to where you are today. That's such an interesting and unique story, but it's great to just get us started where you are, and you can just start us out, with what you're doing today. And
sure,
we'll start with that.
Of course, I'm so happy to get an opportunity to tell you what we're doing today, because I think it's so important. So I'm the executive director of a program known as the I Thirst Initiative. It's a mission of the missionary servants of the Most Holy Trinity. And they are, of course, a community of priests and brothers who were founded about 100 years ago, actually in 1921, so nearly 100 years ago, by a former Vincentian priest by the name of Father Thomas Judge. And his charism was to serve the poor and the abandoned. But what's so interesting about Father Judge was that amongst those that he considered abandoned were those that were suffering from what we would call today substance use disorders, drug and alcohol addiction. And so this community of priests and brothers have always been at the forefront, the cutting edge of working with that very vulnerable and marginalized community for the past 100 years in different manifestations. So this in 2020 is the 21st century manifestation of the I Thirst initiative of his charism. And that is, it's a three-pillared program. What we saw was, what we understood was that at its root, this is a disease which is spiritual in nature. It's a desire to assuage a pain, to fill a hole in the soul, and it has devastating physiological and psychological ramifications, of course. But if that were the case, if we really believed that the disease of addiction were at its root a spiritual disease, then who was really offering a spiritual remedy? The church was not really doing anything systematically, and we thought, that truly has to change. And so the I Thirst Initiative is a three-pillared program. The first pillar is of education and prevention. The second pillar is to work with those who are incarcerated and in treatment facilities. And the third pillar is to support all of that by having aftercare and community building projects and programs for folks. So I think the big thing that we're doing right now, Whitney, is that we have a curriculum. It's a 48-hour academically certified curriculum, 48 hours of academic instruction, where we teach lay leaders and clergy how to minister to people by providing spiritual consolation and recovery resource information, so that there could be a resource person in every Catholic parish. That's our dream, right? To educate people so that we could go back into our parishes and not only work one-on-one with individuals and with their families who are suffering. So many people are suffering in silence because of the stigma of this disease, right?
Right.
Who knew you could knock on the door of any Catholic church? Actually, no matter what your denomination, maybe you didn't even have a faith, but you knew at every Catholic church, there would be somebody there that could offer you that spiritual consolation and recovery resource information and shepherd you through this process. And be with you, accompany you, sit with you, dialogue with you, hear you, feel your presence. And also recommend, as I said, some recovery resource information. Wow, that is our dream, so that every parish would have that. And we're doing that. We're doing these trainings in various dioceses and archdioceses throughout the nation now, so that the church might have a more amplified voice in this great societal malady. It's so important.
It is so important, Keaton, and your work is so important. It's exciting to think, as you said, that at the parish level, that folks could get even just an initial, remedy to some of the beginnings of those, especially when it comes to families. So many families are affected by this. So I think I understand that you start with at the parish level, or do you start at the diocesan level with the bishop?
Well, what we do is we generally train per diocese, right? So we get people from all over each diocese in different parishes, and we train them. For example, right now we're in the midst of training in the Archdiocese of Boston. We have a huge proponent in Cardinal Sean O'Malley, who is really behind our program and really sees the need for the church to play an amplified role. He's been so proactive, and that entire archdiocese for years under the stewardship of Father Joe White has done so much to help this population. And so what we're doing is we're going in there and we're training a cohort of clergy. There's deacons, there's priests, and there are lay leaders from various different ministries that they are in already. Many people have been affected by the disease of addiction, either themselves, that they are in recovery, or that they've had a loved one that has suffered, or some of them are bereaved parents that are there because they want to give back to the communities. This is their way of healing. So we come together, we meet twice a week. And we study. We have a workbook, a 214-page workbook, very interactive. We engage with each other. We share stories. We talk about pastoral care strategies, etc. It's all based in our Catholic spirituality, the sacred scripture, some of the wonderful writings of various folks throughout the ages. Last night we were studying Elrod de Revaux. Forgive my French, but it's
I have not heard of him, actually.
A 12th century Cistercian abbot that wrote about spiritual friendship and wrote about societal maladies. It was as though it was plucked out of today's readings or news or something of that nature, because it was so appropriate for what we're talking about, which shows throughout the ages. We have all had attachments. Scripture speaks about having an unnatural attachment to a substance, to a behavior, to a person. And so it's we come together, we study. Now, those folks, after the 48-hour training, will be academically certified through Seton Hall University in New Jersey, which is offering this certification, and through the I Thirst Initiative. And they will be able to go back into their parishes with this new ministry. They will work one-on-one with individuals, whether that is the afflicted person or their family members. And they will also work with their pastors to develop an appropriate recovery ministry that is appropriate to that parish's needs. So what does that mean? That could mean, helping to set up a recovery mass or healing masses or recovery rosaries, start a retreat program, start a family bereavement group for those that suffer, because bereavement from addiction is different than bereavement. Somebody's loved one dies of cancer, and we're all feeling terribly. Of course, somebody dies of addiction, and other people may be more judgmental. What did you do wrong? What was the matter with that person? So there's a stigma that's associated with it. So to bring people together, they are not judged, where they are only feeling God's love and mercy. It's a super important thing, and that's what the Archdiocese of Boston is doing it. The Diocese of Camden, New Jersey has just completed it, and we're working with various other dioceses to get it up and running in 2021. All done virtually, by the way, which really lends itself to our work, right? Because now we can do a wonderful cohort of people, and they could be anywhere in the country, anywhere in the world, for that matter.
Wow, that is amazing how this whole turn of events has helped you in some ways get the word out.
Absolutely.
So if somebody were interested in trying to get involved or learn more about this, is that something they could do through their parish or straight from the I Thirst website? I know you have a website.
Yeah, well, I absolutely would tell them to get in touch with us via our website, which is www.ithirstinitiative.org. And that they could reach out to us via that, and we could provide them with information to get them started. We can, we have a team of people that would work with their diocese, work with their parishes, etc. to give them ways of doing it. We've got parish assembly programs, we've got collegiate programs, really a way to inform our church and to empower our church to become a resource for those that are suffering from addictions and their families.
Wow, that's such important work. And I think that you really touch on something there with the suffering that is such a big part of addiction, and not just for those who are, addicted themselves, but their families. I know later in this podcast, I hope to talk to you a lot about the statistics, in the world today, and they're very frightening, and yet there is so much hope as well. And I think that it's time for the church to really become, she has all the tools, and of course, we turn to the church for so much, as we should, and this is just a natural place and time, really, for the church to be there in this element. And I think when you think about addiction, at least I do, it's certainly touched my family, and I'm sure it's touched most families in some way. There is, like, as you said earlier, I think this mind, body, soul connection is so important to that. And just to get the spiritual side of things is maybe not the first place people go. So yes, talk to us a little bit about how you do that. I know that you are also, you work closely with AA programs, and so can you share with us a little bit about how you do that?
Sure, of course. We are the words "I thirst," right? Aside from being the fifth of the last 7 utterances of Christ on the cross, it's also an acronym for our program. And the word "thirst" is an acronym for the Healing Initiative, Recovery, Spirituality, and 12 Steps. So we very much believe in the 12-step programs and very much support the fellowships. AA, NA, Al-Anon, Naranon, and the other fellowships that share in the 12-step program, because we see that, the basis of the 12-step program is in sacred scripture. And it's amazing how Catholics really played such a role in the beginning of what we now know as Alcoholics Anonymous, because originally the founders, Bill Wilson, Dr. Bob Smith, were members of what they called the Oxford Group, and the Oxford Group was led by evangelicals. And so at a certain point early on, those that were gathering, who were suffering from the disease of alcoholism, were gathering with the Oxford Group. They had their own 6-step program. But it was interesting, and they were doing that in Akron, Ohio, and they were doing it in New York City. And there was a group that would come out from Cleveland, and they would join in the Akron, Ohio Oxford Group. But the Catholic Church in Cleveland, we're talking in the late 1930s, 1939, the Catholic Church in Cleveland said, we're going to excommunicate you because we don't want you to be so closely affiliated with an evangelical group such as the Oxford Group. We can't have our Catholics coming out there. There was a great consternation there, great contention. So on one very exciting evening, which was I believe it was May 10th in 1939, a group of the Cleveland Catholics went to Akron and said, tomorrow, we will not be a part of the Oxford Group. Tomorrow will be the first meeting of what we will call Alcoholics Anonymous, because at that point, the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, which we call the big book, had already been printed. So they took the book, they took the name of the book, and in 1939, on May 11th, in Cleveland Heights, Ohio, was the first, what we know as the Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, the very first under that title. And it's quite interesting because it was because of the Catholics that really wanted it. So the spiritual aspect of it, it's a spiritual program. It's born, the 12 steps are born out of sacred scripture, primarily the Sermon on the Mount, 1 Corinthians 13, love is patient, love is kind, that we all know. And then the book of James, the epistle of James, the letter of James, where we get the idea of faith without works is dead. That not only do we have to believe and have an intimacy with our God, but we've got to work on ourselves. And that's what the 12 steps provide. So that's kind of our correlation with the fellowships, with all of the fellowships, is that we believe in that community as a way of helping folks. We also believe that the church needs to play its role and understand the scriptural basis and why the 12 steps work. So we want to be there. We want to support the fellowships, but we have our own role to play as well. So it's a wonderful place to be. We want a lot of churches have the fellowship meetings in the basements. They have the AA meetings there, sometimes an NA meeting. And our thing is like, you know what? Let's go down into the basement and bring those people up to the sanctuary. Let's say, you are welcome. We get you. We get you. The sacred scripture talks about our attachments, about our drunkenness. We can go to Proverbs 23. We can go to talk about Noah in Genesis 9. We know God has told us all throughout salvation history, I know you're going to leave me. I know you're going to leave me. I know you're going to worship false idols, but turn to me with a contrite heart and I will welcome you home. And that's what the church needs to be saying now. We know you're going to go. We know you're going to be, you're going to be distracted by this modern idolatry, which is what substance abuse is. It really becomes, because that substance becomes the person's God, becomes that person's lover, becomes everything. So much so that the person is blinded. And it's impossible for them to develop an intimacy with their God, with their fellows, or even with themselves, because they are so unnaturally attached to that substance. So we want to embrace them. We want to understand them. We want to connect with them, and we want to welcome them home.
Wow, that's a really beautiful way of describing that. I think just bringing them out of the shadows is a way to think of it. You're right. I think it has been something that's been kind of hidden, addiction and all that goes along with it. There's a stigma and a lot of shame, unfortunately, associated with it. But just to hear the words, I thirst, and God is with us through every suffering, and he knows that it's there. He knows we suffer, and he wants us to come to him. Yeah, that's such a beautiful,
absolutely
beautiful reflection.
Yeah.
I had no idea about the origins of AA. So that's fascinating.
Yeah. Right. And the 12, we look at the 12 steps, and Bill Wilson, of course, is the author of them, one of the founders of AA.
Right.
And he was very, if you really study them, you will see how closely paralleling they are to the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius, right? But any sort of self-emptying that our faith always talks about. So whether you can look at Interior Castle, right, by St. Teresa of Avila, how we walk through those various rooms, we kind of dust them out and get all that clutter out until we find the God that dwells within us. It's all about the self-emptying and getting rid of so much of the false sense of self to finding the God that dwells within us. It's what we call our journey of transformation. Because, when you look at some of the great authors, the great theologians of all time, you look at St. Augustine, you look at Thomas Aquinas, you look at Dante, right? Every one of them writes about their personal journey of transformation as they journey to find their authentic selves. They come to find their God. As they get rid of all the clutter in their lives, as we find out who we truly are, our authentic selves, we find our God dwelling within us. That's what all of our sacred traditions, sacred scripture, and so many authors, even outside our traditions, talk about that personal journey of transformation. That journey of transformation applies likewise to the 12 steps, finding our authentic selves, and in so doing, finding our God.
Wow. Yes, I think if you know people who have come out of an addiction, or, I know it's kind of a lifelong struggle for many, but when you see that person, has made that transformation, it's really truly a miracle. And it just causes everybody around that person to have such hope. And so I love that. I love that idea of transformation. I think that is so important. And, it's really part of the human condition. So all of us, whether it's an addiction or whether it's some other suffering that we're going through, it's really very similar, all of suffering. And so I think that's so important that you relate that to those writers such as Teresa of Avila and others who just talk about suffering, because all of us can relate. And addiction,
absolutely,
is such a unique one. So Keaton, your story coming to where you are today, to be the executive director of the I Thirst Initiative, is really astounding. And I think I'm so excited for you to share it with our listeners, because God really has used you in a way that I don't think that you ever would have guessed, and so we're just excited. We'd love to hear your story and how you came to the place that you are today. So can you just, go back as far as you need to?
Sure. I always say that my story is really a case of God calling an unlikely person to do something for him. Addiction did not touch my family, so it has since, but it at the time when this was all going on, I really had no I had no interaction with anybody that was addicted to anything. I had never met anybody. So my story is simply that I was a singer. I'm a singer. I'm an entertainer. I have been for forever. I did have a career on Wall Street. I graduated from Georgetown and I went to Wall Street and I did all the things I thought I was supposed to do. And then I realized in my life, I had always really wanted to sing and perform since I was a tiny little person. And my mom was a wonderful singer, and she did beautiful masses and sang for many churches. And so I had grown up, we didn't have babysitters in those days. So my mother would sing at a funeral and I'd be there with a little prayer book next to her, listening to her sing. So singing was always a part of what we did in our family. And so I always wanted to do likewise. And I left Wall Street. I started very slowly out singing and really getting some technical work done on, to understand it and taking lessons again. And I had studied with Mom, but that didn't really count too much. And I began easing my way into the industry. And, over the years, I was very blessed because I always felt that there were persons that had maybe even way better voices, but I was a good singer and I could emote. I could interact with an audience. I think that was the gift that I was given, is that I could be very close to my personal emotions when I sang, and people responded to that. So I was able to do a tremendous amount of work, including, the majority of the singing that I had done was with 18-piece orchestras, or what we would call big bands. So I got to go all over with wonderful big bands here in New Jersey and then beyond. I've sung for 2 presidential inaugurations. I've sung for so many huge events. I was the singer the great singer that nobody had ever heard of, that was just working. And it was a blessing because I loved it. And it was tremendous. I worked with fabulous musicians. Somewhere along the line, though, when it started, I lost my first marriage unexpectedly. And I was really devastated by that. My husband at the time, had moved on, and I was not expecting that. And I was very sad, and I harbored a lot of resentment. So I for about 8 years was a very angry person. And when we're talking about suffering, or we're talking about any sort of resentment or attachment, I was attached to resentments. I was angry. I was thinking about, all sorts of things. I was really distracted from my relationship with my God because I harbored resentment, and that's a very devastating thing because it's like holding on to a poison, and any poison, if I threw it at you, you would run away from it. But the poison of resentment, boy, I held on to. It was like a rattlesnake inside of me. And as the years went by, I didn't get any better. I just corroded, I felt, inside, and I lost a lot of who I was. And I just became very angry, and I became a victim. And I think at a certain point I enjoyed that victimhood, I was kind of living in it. And then after 8 years, I had a crazy experience where the woman that became my husband's wife, my ex-husband's wife, we had a moment together where she was quite contrite. I had never seen her before, and she found me and she asked for my forgiveness. And it was really a God moment, because at that moment I just looked at her and I put my arms around her and I said, I forgive you. And I did. And I realized, I could get emotional talking about it now because it was a moment that really changed me, I felt that rattlesnake leave just in 1 second, and I realized, wow, that was a God moment. That was me. I couldn't have let go of that. But God, the Holy Spirit came upon me, and when I said it, he took everything from me. And I literally, Whitney, can tell you that at that moment, my heart changed. When I talk about this, I talk about, you can't fully give your heart to God if you're fighting a battle in one corner of it. And I was fighting a battle in that corner. So I couldn't give myself to God or to anyone, because that war was raging in my heart. But at that moment, I dropped the weapons, my heart was open. And that's when God really was able to just take my heart. And I started developing this relationship with this God. And I knew it was he that had done it and not I. So I started being called to prayer, and I would pray. And I started praying the rosary, and I started getting very close to Our Lady, who I really felt brought me to the foot of the cross with her. And it was really amazing. It was a beautiful and amazing moment. And it changed everything. So people would ask me, because I was an entertainer and I felt comfortable in front of an audience, can you please talk about something? Can you talk about your experience? And I would go and I would give witness to so many different rosary societies. I started speaking all over about my reversion to my faith. I came back to the faith. And then people would say, boy, that was pretty entertaining. Can you talk about St. Paul's themes of community or forgiveness? And I'd be like, no, I don't know. Well, I only know about me, So I went back to school. And I had no idea what I was going to do, but I knew I was called to learn more about my faith. And I loved it. It was me. I went to Seton Hall University, Immaculate Conception Seminary School of Theology. And it was I and maybe 4 or 5 other lay people per class, and a school of seminarians gathered from all over the world. And it was the most remarkable experience. It was so beautiful. I didn't have any idea what I was going to do with it. But when I first got there, I was terrified because I hadn't been to school in years. I mean, when I went to school, when you were still typing your papers on a Selectric, and you were doing, I went to the computer lab in the basement of Lauringer Library at George. It was like such a big deal, a computer. And now, I was a fish out of water. But I met a seminarian on my second day there, and I was petrified. I thought, I'm never going to go back. I don't know how to do a different footnote. I don't know what these are, And he came up to me and he goes, you look like you could use a friend. And I said, oh my God, do I really? Is it that bad? And he said, yes. And little did I know, his name was Brother Aro, and he was a member of the Missionary Servants, the Most Holy Trinity. He's now Father Aro. He was a seminarian, and he shepherded me, not only through my college years, but also shepherded me into the community of missionary servants. And it was there that I went, and I became a part of their community there at the Shrine of St. Joseph in Stirling, New Jersey. And I was asked to speak at the recovery retreat that they were having for 25 women that were suffering from heroin addiction. And my thought was, why do they want to hear me? I mean, Whitney, I had never smoked marijuana once in my life. It just wasn't something that I did, and I thought, what do they care about what I have to say? And the gentleman that invited me, became a mentor of mine, Mr. Ron Reinhardt, said to me, Keaton, do you think there's nothing that they can learn from you? And I was like, well, I guess, And he said, do you think there's nothing that you can learn from them? And I was taken aback because it was a very humbling moment, because I guess maybe I had thought, there was nothing I could learn. So I went and I prayed a lot, and I went and I spoke to them, and I told them my witness story, because at that point that still was what I had, the witness story. So when I laughed, they laughed. And when I cried, because I could tap in very easily to the emotions that I had felt, I could tap in very easily to the feelings of unworthiness that I felt, the feelings of being unloved and perhaps unlovable that I had suffered after the demise of my marriage, guilt over not having made it work that I thought was going to, all these feelings of shame and whatnot. And as I expressed them, they felt what I felt. And something dawned on me there. I think perhaps the greatest lesson that I had learned was that it didn't matter what had broken us, whether it was addiction, whether it was adultery, whether it was anything else, that we all get broken. What do we do in our brokenness? How do we support each other? How do we love each other? And at that moment, I loved those girls, those women. And I left there and I felt a euphoria. I have to say, I have never, ever felt this before. And I have never felt it quite the same way since. I didn't know what it was. I felt this feeling so prevalent and so pervasive in my being that the next morning, which was a Monday morning, I went to daily mass, and I went to my parish priest, and I said, I have to talk to you. And I told him the whole story. And I said, I have this feeling. And he said to me, Keaton, I think you've been called. And I said, called? who's calling? He goes, no, he started laughing. He said, call the way that people get called. I said, I didn't get called. I said, Isaiah gets called, I said, people like me, I'm just a singer in New Jersey. We don't get called. He goes, Keaton, everybody gets called, just not everybody listens. So I left there and I thought, wow, I think I have found my population, my people. As a result of that, they had asked me, will you come back and be a regular member of the recovery ministry? So I did. And every month I would go and I would do my witness. Men, they said, are you okay with men? I said, of course. I would go talk. And, part of being an entertainer is being vulnerable and authentic, and because that is where I live, and that they knew I wasn't coming in and trying to pretend that I was one of them. I'm not, and I can't walk in their shoes, but my shoes, I walk in the shoes that walk next to them, and I hold on to them, and I love them where they're at. And that's what I quickly found my role to be. And so when my mentors in this program, after a couple of years, retired or went on sabbatical, I was asked to take over the recovery program. And it was while I was in the recovery, I realized that I didn't want to do anything anymore unless it was for this population. I didn't need to go on stage anymore and perform. So I retired from that. And I still sing, as best I can to folks, but it's in the context of ministry. It's in the context of the ministry. It's in allowing music to be a salve for people. And sometimes it's fun just to burst out into song when people don't expect it. But I gave that up, and it was hard. It was a hard thing to me. That was a good, lucrative, way of earning a living. And then this is, less so for sure. But I knew that this was where I had to be. I knew it was, and I trusted at this point because I knew that my God would provide for me, even if times were rough, right? So that's what we started doing. And as I took over, I realized, boy, I was watching people coming into our retreat programs, and they would come in on a Friday night, and they didn't know who we were, and they came from treatment facilities or halfway houses. And they would come like these women had, on retreat. And they would come on a Friday and be so downtrodden and whatnot. And we would meet them at the door, and we would welcome them with love and hugs. And then we would serve them, and we would have speakers, and we would have time to play games and just to interact and connect. And so many of them said to me, when they left, they said, you made us feel human again. So many of them had been incarcerated or in treatment for so long. You made us feel human again. Not me personally, the whole team. And I thought, oh my God, could you imagine if our church did that throughout the world? Could you imagine if we all participated in reaching out to the margins to find those that were on the margins that were suffering in such a way? And my thought was that, we weren't doing this because we really didn't understand the disease of addiction, and the more that I got involved with it, the more that I understood what folks were going through, and really how, we needed to be servant leaders for them. We needed to accompany them on this journey to understand what they were suffering. Listen, nobody wants to wake up in the morning and be dope sick or have the DTs. They don't want that. But the disease takes over their mind, the self-deception that occurs, the rationalization, because it is literally a brain disease as well. So people say, well, why can't they just stop? Well, they understood what was going on physiologically, that the brain chemistry now had adapted to this quote unquote new norm, that the person with their greatest intention says, I don't want to do it anymore. I don't want to do it anymore. They get released from treatment. They walk past the corner where the liquor store was, where they used to buy everything. And the brain now starts sending these messages that saying, go, 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 buy that liquor. Drink it, drink. They're fighting a war. By themselves, they cannot win. They need our help, the help of community, and they need to surrender to the God of their understanding. And we help them develop that intimacy with that God. We shepherd them through this process. They may not even know God. They may not want God at this point, but they truly love connection. And I remember thinking, Whitney, one time I was in deep in prayer. I was in the ministry, but I hadn't written the curriculum yet. And I was wondering how, what was I supposed to be doing? And I was deep in prayer and praying in mass. And I said, God, what do you want me to do with this population? I know I'm here with them. What am I supposed to do? And when you hear the voice of God, because it's written on your heart. And for me, it's always much more profound than I could ever be. And it's much simpler. And the only thing I heard was, show them how much I love them. And that's what we do. We just love them.
Yeah. Well, your story is so touching, and I can't help but I want to kind of just go back for just a second to a couple things that struck me as you were telling me this story and sharing with our listeners. In an earlier conversation you and I had, you mentioned that when you gave up the resentment after, you say 8 years, when you gave that up, I thought it was very interesting how you mentioned that you didn't really necessarily want to give it up, that it was something you suddenly felt in that encounter, that you were hanging on to it, and all of a sudden it really was now up to you to give that up. Can you tell us just a little bit about that feeling? Because I think it has so much to do with what happened.
Yeah, sure. I would never probably have given that up, that resentment, because there was a part of me that held on and was self-defining by my victimhood. And I'll tell you why, because I was the good girl, the one that kept her vows. I was very righteous. I was very self-righteous in my feelings about myself. And it was easy for me to look down, cast aspersions upon the woman that, quote unquote, had come into my family and ruined my family life. And so I kind of liked living in that image, because it gave me like this feeling of superiority. And wow, at that moment, when this woman came to me, and listen, it took such gumption, such courage to come talk to me. I was so angry. I was such an angry person. I mean, I would have my son dropped off to my house, my ex and his wife would drop my little boy off, and I would say, don't have the car turned toward my house because I don't want to see her, all things of that nature. I was just angry. Hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. Little place next to that in the dictionary. But at that moment, when I saw her contrition, when she came to me, and I realized the courage that it took to do that, I was moved by it. I was moved.
Yeah.
And I think that, that I talk sometimes about, once you're a mom, there's a mother love that happens deep within us that is stronger than any hate. And I called upon that. That came up in spades. And, and as it turns out, this woman who became a very dear friend of mine, because she was the stepmom for my son, right? She had awful things in her background, and she, had things that she had, trialed through and great tribulation in her young life. And, I came to regard her as a very dear friend, and that only helped not only my soul, but boy, oh boy, it helped my son growing up.
Right, right.
Not to hold on to that kind of stuff.
Well, I thank you for sharing that. I know that's it's an emotional thing, but I think that's why I asked you to go back there, because what I'm also hearing through your story seems to me to be such a universal one, and I think where so many people can really relate. And that is when you talk about your transformation, you can so see the humility that was involved, and how you really had to get to that place of humility, of truly turning to our Lord. And you did that all along the way. And it seems to me that when when she came to you and she gave you that opportunity, then you also had that opportunity. It was a two-way street. Forgiveness is always
right.
A two-way street. So I love that, how God used that humility that you showed. And that was when things really changed for you personally. And when this whole this whole mission really came to be. So it's really remarkable to hear that. I want to see if you could talk to us a little bit quickly about Trinity Missions, but just because I think that that's something that might be a little bit unclear to folks. Trinity Missions is the missionary servants of the Most Holy Trinity. And so your involvement with them was when you came to the shrine, is that right? And
Right. The Shrine of St. Joseph is one of their mission sites. And so the priests and brothers that are there are members of Trinity Missions, also known as missionary servants of the Most Holy Trinity. And it is they who have the long-standing ministry of working in various manifestations with people with addictions, since their inception in 1921, since their founding, I should say, by Father Judge. So yeah, I mean, they gave me the opportunity. They adopted the I Thirst initiative as one of their core missions in 2017. So now this whole community of priests and brothers supports everything that we do. And they're in 38 different missions on 2 different continents. So we're all working towards the same goals.
Yes, and Trinity Missions for our listeners, trinitymissions.com, is that right? Or is it .org? Trinity Missions.
Yeah, .org.
Trinitymissions.org.
.org.
Yes, you can really go to that site and see all the amazing things that they are involved with. And it's very easy actually to get involved yourself just through, you can just scroll down and see the different initiatives, and this is one of them. But and then just it even explains how much, say for I Thirst, it'll show what donating $5 can do for those in recovery, and it's really clear how you can help there. So I encourage those to check that out. And then where I'd like to kind of end up here is if you could share with us what you've become so knowledgeable about this disease, and just maybe some of the statistics that that we have. It's pretty astounding how many folks are have any association with addiction of all sorts. So if you could just share with us some of that knowledge that you've gained.
Well, I'll tell you pre-COVID, and then I'll tell you why it's so important that we, what the urgency is right now. So, for the last several years, we have been losing approximately 70,000 souls to drug overdoses per year. If you think about 70,000, that's a number that's a very, very important statistical number, because you look at that number and you say, wow, this is seriously a problem. That's why we were talking about the opioid epidemic for so many years. And 70,000 is 5,000 more than the number of people that could fit into the Hard Rock Stadium where we had the Super Bowl last year. So if you ever take a visual of that, it's an enormous stadium. And if you think about every seat filled plus 5,000, it gives you kind of a feeling, an image of how many people we're losing. So this is all prior to COVID, and that was approximately 192 persons per day in the United States. That number is considered low by groups such as the Recovery Centers of America, which is very reputable treatment facilities. They think that number was not calculated accurately, and they think that that's a very conservative estimate, and that the number really prior to COVID was closer to 90,000 perhaps, and so that, that's an enormous number. We're thinking just under 100,000 people a year die from this. That's not even taking into account the numbers of people that are using and still out there and still suffering. That's just the number that perished. Right. So SAMHSA, which is the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Organization of the United States, they came out and they said, this is, we're losing about one out of every 6 people suffers from some sort of substance use disorder. That doesn't mean knows somebody. That means 1 out of every 6 people suffer. So if you look, amazing. Back in the day when we used to gather as a the parish family, and you look out amongst the parish family, you could calculate statistically that there are people in every parish, I don't care where you are, that are sick and suffering from this disease. And certainly there are families that are affected and whatnot. This was all prior to COVID. What we have seen with COVID, and the reason why it's exacerbated, we've seen 20 to 40% increase both in overdoses and in relapses. So let's think about that. That puts that number at like what? If we use it conservatively, it puts it at 90,000 or thereabouts, right? Maybe 98,000, some number like that. Otherwise, it's over 100,000 if it really were the less conservative estimate, the estimate where we think, maybe it's a higher number. So the numbers are outstanding. They've been exacerbated by this. Why? Why has COVID exacerbated this? Well, because the opposite of addiction is not sobriety, it's connection. We know it's connection. So now isolation is a hallmark of this disease. So now we tell people, well, you must necessarily quarantine, you must necessarily isolate, which of course is necessary. And we have people that are losing connection. This is what sends people back out into addiction, especially with the suspension of in-person fellowship meetings. There are many, many people, we take for granted how we use this digital platform, and we're so blessed to be able to do it. I feel very blessed in our ministry to be able to teach these cohorts from all over the world on my computer here in my office. But there are many, many people that don't have the correct devices, for whom this is too confusing because they have been out on the streets for years. Well, how are we reaching those people? The problem is that those are examples of people that are really suffering during this time. And so the numbers are outstanding. Plus, one of the big things is that programs, mental health programs, substance abuse programs that were supported on a county, state, and even federal level that were, earmarked for that, those monies have now been reallocated towards COVID-19 needs, necessarily, right? But then what happens to all the people that were counting on those programs? Those programs don't exist. So now we have people that are lacking in resource, lacking in fellowship, lacking in connection, and they're suffering mightily. They are suffering more mightily than we can imagine. We're all suffering. We're all suffering. But they more so than ever. So this is why we get all fired up, because this is an opportunity, right? This is an opportunity for the church to step up and play a bigger role. I would say, my humble opinion, it's our obligation to do so. It's our obligation to be the community where people can come to us in the midst of this societal malady. This is the role of our church. This is the koinonia. This is that ultimate community in Christ. Whitney, I always talk about this, about how I feel like all faith communities, but particularly the church, that we have acted more like the priest and the Levite in the Good Samaritan story, right? The poor guy gets beaten and robbed. He's left for dead. The priest and the Levite see him. They walk on the other side of the road. They're the holy men. We understand why, though, because they didn't want to bloody themselves. It would have made them unholy, unclean. I understand. But Jesus, in telling us this story, he tells us the parable to the crowds. He tells it to us, and he says, who was this man's neighbor? And they said, the one that showed him mercy, the Samaritan, a man who himself was ostracized in those days as being a mixed breed, if you will. And he's the one that showed him mercy. And what does Jesus say to the crowds? He goes, go do the same. And the thing with addiction is, you know what? It is bloody. There are people lying in the streets. You will get unclean. This is not an easy ministry. But it's not about anything I'm saying. It's about what Christ says. It's about living the gospel message of showing his love to others, showing God's love and God's mercy to those who have been on the margins for so long. It's what our Holy Father tells us. It's the art of accompaniment. It's the culture of encounter that Pope Francis has been speaking about since before his papacy. These are themes of our church. It is the church as the field hospital that Pope Francis talks about. This is really where we're at, and we're all being called to do it in this ministry, and it's amazing to see the people that are taking our coursework and learning and sharing. It's so deeply emotional, and people are getting so excited and fired up to go out there on the margins and to do God's work and to meet people where they're at, and it's a blessing to work with everyone and to have been given that opportunity to do this for them.
Well, of course, that is where the church should be. And so you're absolutely right. It just only makes sense that the church would be right there in the suffering of her people, which is where she always has been, just because that's who Christ is. And I think also what's beautiful about that is the sacramental element as well.
Yes.
I'm a convert, and so one of the things that I think at first was a struggle for me was confession. But I see confession as such an important part of the addiction process as well. both, formal confession, but even just personal confession. And so the sacramental life is so just conducive, really, to aiding those suffering in any capacity, but certainly those who are addicted. As you said, they are early on. You mentioned that it's as if when you are addicted to something, you almost cannot actually have a faith that's active at that time as well. It's almost like a barrier to your faith. So for the church to offer
it
help.
absolutely is.
Yep. Yeah. So we're so it's so exciting, really, to hear from you and to hear all that the potential. There's so much potential there, and it seems natural. It seems like this should have already been happening, but God, called you in this particular mission. It's very clear. So, just to kind of come full circle, you started by telling us that you're involved very much right now with the Boston Diocese and the Camden Diocese. If for those listening and they want to get involved, and you said come to you directly through your website.
Right.
But what can they share with maybe their pastors or those who are in lay positions in the church to get them excited? Because that's how I feel. I feel very eager to share this news with, my pastor and others in our community. So what can they share and how do they get that going?
Well, I actually go back and recommend them to the website. And I'll tell you why, because at part of the website, there's a series of videos. We are just super blessed to have had a wonderful videographer by the name of Michael Paris to do a whole bunch of films. He did a film on us and various outtakes about various people that we have served and their stories. And I think once you have a visual, once you see some of the media that we have done, that you get an idea, it can talk to you about the programs. It can basically tell you on that website everything that I've told you today, and then show you some really cool videos about it. And they're very emotional. They're about bereaved parents that talk about it, bereaved sisters and brothers. People have made it out. People that have developed a relationship with their God. I mean, those videos I think are very, very important. Plus, if they reach out to us via the website and they want some hard copy, we have beautiful marketing kind of kits that kind of tell you everything about what we're doing right now. But that or the website really, really will get people going. We designed it to be to use it in such a way that it really conveys our message. And we're updating videos literally every day about the work that we're doing. So I encourage people to visit us that way and to reach out. We want to hear from you. Another thing is we're going to be offering the coursework through Seton Hall University. And we're going to be doing it virtually. It's going to be in the spring semester, which is sometime probably in February. I don't have the exact dates yet, but they're going to be, we'll have those soon. What that means is that people from all over can register for it if they want to take this course, and they could be certified within it, and they could bring it back to their parishes, so wherever they are. That's the beauty of the digital platform for us, is that we really are reaching people well beyond, what we might have done had we just been relegated to the local folks. So we welcome people to inquire about that when that comes up, and they get 4.8 continuing education units that they can bring back, because I know a lot of people in various capacities need continuing ed credits to keep up with things. And this is accredited or certified, I should say, through multiple disciplines. So they can find out more about that by reaching out to us, and we'll give them that information. It's going to be hot off the presses, I think, by next week. So we'll have dates and we'll have times if people are interested in the coursework. And right now we have communities, and we've got groups of people that are working with us that are in Austin, Texas, and that are in Tampa, Florida, and are in, Delaware, and just all over the place. So in many ways, as I said, the digital platform has allowed us to spread this message more clearly and to a greater audience. And so that's a blessing for us. And we're very pleased with that. So hoping to reach.
Yeah, it's so exciting. It really is. Can you share that one more time, your website again, iThirst?
Sure. www.ithirstinitiative.org. iThirst, like the words of Christ, ithirstinitiative.org. That's all one word.
Great. Thank you, Keaton. And it's interesting that they can even just get going on that even before. So I think sometimes we're afraid to go to our parishes, or we think something else is already happening, or they're so busy, but even to just be able to get that knowledge through the coursework first, even if that's where they want to start, what a great way to then go to your parish. But either way, it sounds like there's an avenue for those who are interested.
Yeah. You know what, Whitney, it is. And we are committed. Our mission is to empower our church, capital C, all the way down, to become a resource for those that are suffering from addictions and for their families. And in order to empower the church, we need boots on the ground. That means people that are trained and educated that can offer pastoral care appropriately, one-on-one, help set up parish ministries. We need boots on the ground. We need to create servant leaders. So we do a lot of work in college communities. We're working on a catechetical program that will be an addendum to the very fine catechetical programs that are out there that teaches about the disease of addiction in age-appropriate language, but talks about attachments, talks about temptations, desires, all of these things that are theological and spiritual in nature, but are also ways to really bring the idea and the concepts of addiction and attachment to young people in a way that's appropriate for them, that we can start talking about them. So instead of bringing in clinical programs or secular programs, bringing them in, we want to use that which we've been given in our theology and our spirituality, and use that because God has already given us the tools. God has given us everything that we need. And we have to be aware of them and use them appropriately, and go out and serve his children. The best way that we can serve our God is to serve his suffering children.
That's amen to that, Keaton. Thank you so much. And your mission to bring the story and just the facts of addiction out of the shadows is so important. So God bless you. And
thank you.
We'll be sharing as much as we can about what you're doing. And so thank you again so much for joining us today.
It's my pleasure. I'm so thankful for an opportunity. As you see, I can talk forever about this. I get all fired up about it. I hope the listeners and everybody that comes in contact with us will reach out to us so that we can help serve. We can help serve a very vulnerable and marginalized population. And I'm thankful to you all for reaching out to me. So God bless you. Thank you.
God bless you. Thank you for your work, Keaton. Take care.
You too.
Thank you for joining us on Good Catholic Great Stories. If you enjoyed the show, please be sure to leave a review and subscribe. You can listen on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and wherever podcasts are available. You can also watch the videos of these podcasts on our Good Catholic YouTube channel. Learn more at goodcatholic.com. Thanks for listening, and God bless.